think that you kind of have to not care what people think of you, but you can't care if people think you're, oh, this person's just working too hard, or why is that person staying late, or is that person a goody two-shoes?
Welcome to Champions Mojo Weekly Podcast, where your hosts Kelly Pallas and Maria Parker share with you what it takes to be a champion. Kelly is a former Division I head swim coach, Olympic trials qualifier, and holds Masters World and National swimming records. And Maria holds world records in endurance cycling and was the overall women's winner of the world's toughest bike race across America. They'll be sharing their personal stories and wisdom, along with interviewing other champions to give you the tools you need for becoming a true champion in your own life. And now, your host, Kelly Pallas.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Champions Mojo podcast, where I am co-hosting with Maria Parker. Hey, Maria.
Hey, Kelly. I'm so glad to be here today.
Me too. Maria, we have a real treat for our listeners. Our guest today is a two-time Olympian in the 2004 and the 2008 Olympics. She also broke the world record in the 400 IM and the American record in the 200 IM. In the 2008 Olympics, she won a silver and 2 bronze medals. Though to some people that is a huge accomplishment, our guest had the pressure of being expected and wanting to win gold or golds in those Olympics, and we're going to hear more about that. But our guest is none other than one of our swimming community's greatest of all time, Katie Hoff. But there's more on Katie, Maria, and could you please share a little bit of that?
Sure, Kelly. Katie opted to skip college swimming and turn pro in 2006 when she signed a 10-year endorsement deal with Speedo, longer than any deal Speedo had ever signed at the time, including Phelps. Hoff won a combined 7 gold medals at the 2005, 2007, and 2011 World Championships. After taking 1 year off after 2012 and mounting a serious comeback in 2013, she began to have health problems, which we'll talk about. And then Katie retired from competition in 2015. We're delighted to have Katie with us. Katie, welcome to Champions Mojo.
Yes, Katie, welcome.
Thank you guys so much. I'm really excited to chat today.
We're really delighted.
Yes. So what have you been up to lately?
Well, lately I've been, in the thick of quarantine, I think with everybody else out there. I actually my husband and I drove 8 hours from where we currently live in New Jersey, Weehawken, New Jersey, to Michigan to quarantine with my in-laws, which is, I feel like sometimes in-laws is a bad word, but I get along really, really well with them. So we're very fortunate to be able to be with family during this time.
I like to hear that because I live next door to my daughter-in-law, and I often wonder if in-law is a bad word for her, but I hope it isn't.
No, I think in-laws is a good word on this podcast because we're sister-in-laws.
That's right. Kelly and I are sister. We love that word. In-laws is the most beautiful word in the English language.
It is. It is. Yeah, it's been really nice, and I've been doing some fun webinars, providing some dry land exercises for swimmers out there, which has been really fun, and working on finishing up my book. So really been taking advantage of this time.
Ooh, tell us about your book.
Yeah, so my book has kind of been in the works for a number of years, but I never really felt like I had, I guess, the perspective, the courage, multiple emotions to really confront and face my past and work with someone that I really trusted. So I worked with a ghostwriter to get out all of my feelings, all of my thoughts, really construct a very inspiring, motivating story. And we've been working on that for the past 6 months now, and it's at completion right now. So I'm now taking the next step to publishing and really, really looking forward to getting my story out there.
That must have been really therapeutic for you to do that.
Yes, therapeutic, cathartic, so many words, healing. I think it's been way more rewarding than I could have ever expected. And the way that the story is written and framed, I'm very, very proud.
Oh, I can't wait to read that. I would love it if more Olympians like you, and there are very few that have had the career that you've had, but your story is so inspirational. I can't wait to read it. That is fantastic. So your career now, you have been retired 5 years. And
Yes.
what are your thoughts looking back on it? And I'm going to preface this by saying that we had already booked you on the show, and I want you to address this, topic that I'm sure is addressed in your book. But Swim Swam, one of our publications that we love, or swim news outlets that we love, published, I don't know if you saw it, I'm sure you probably did, the top 10 greatest swimmers in the world that never won a gold medal. And you were number 2.
I did see that.
With that, like I said in your intro, your career, 99.9% of the whole people in the world would think that was just the most amazing swimming career. You world record holder, American record holder, umpteen championships, world championships, but you never got that gold. And I'd love to just hear how you're putting that in perspective 5 years later.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually interesting, the timing of that article coming out, because it was at the tail end of my book. And a lot of the process of my book has been understanding, coming to terms with framing that particular thing of really the one thing that I wasn't able to achieve, which is a gold medal, and really being able to put that into words. And I think it's never something that I think what I concluded is that you're never going to fully come to terms with something like that. You train for years, you put everything on the line, you put your heart, soul, blood, sweat, tears into this goal. And when that slips away from you, it's never going to feel good. But I think after about 5 years of kind of truly falling off the grid, I really did take a full step away from the swimming world and community to kind of find myself away from that. And now that I've done that and kind of circled back to it through my book, through reaching out to friends, teammates, being more involved in clinics, I've really arrived at the fact that it's not always about that. It's not always about, okay, I didn't get a gold, but look at what that shaped me into. Look at the skill sets that gave me. Look at the experiences I was able to go through because of that quest, because of that journey. And that's truly, I think, where I've arrived. And the ending of the book does such a great job of wrapping that up that I don't want to give away too much. But that, in essence, is where I've really found peace.
Oh, that's beautiful. I saw a TEDx or a TED Talk that you did called Relentless. I'm sure it's been seen many, many, many times. And it was really, really inspirational. But I think one of the things that, as you're talking about this, one of the things I'm thinking is, you are, I assume, really, really competitive person, and you throw everything into what you do, and you have incredible talent. And so there was just tremendous pressure on you as just a young girl. And you're still young. You got your whole life in front of you. I guess, I think I'm loving hearing you talk about the time away and being able to reframe that experience. And what I'm hearing you saying is that you're grateful for what you did and what you got out of it. Is that the, the major lesson for you?
Yeah, I think grateful is a perfect word for it. I think the biggest thing for me in that process to get to grateful, because I think there was a lot of resentment on my part from the way that I had to leave the sport, and just feeling like I didn't have this perfect ending to what I wanted my quote unquote fairy tale to look like. So to not be able to have that go as planned was really difficult. So I wasn't able to be grateful for 5 years. And there's always this nagging feeling in my life that my husband, who was an elite athlete himself, was always noticing. And he kind of had to watch me go through this process of kind of mourning that I think anyone has when they pour everything into something and it doesn't necessarily go the way that they had intended it. And I'm just so happy that I was able to get there. I think sometimes people go their whole lives and they just kind of push it under the rug or just never address it again. And it manifests itself in different ways, in a negative way. And I feel so much better. And it's still a work in progress. I'm certainly not saying that I'm perfect and just feeling amazing every single day, but being able to now feel more grateful and have a better appreciation for my career has allowed me to write a book. It has allowed me to want to be on podcasts and speak about it and give speeches and give a TED Talk and all these wonderful things that I would have never been able to do had I not gotten to that place.
Yeah. And I think, it's going to sound funny saying this because we've had so many, but many, many, many people have won Olympic gold medals. You haven't done that, but your story is so unique in how your career ended. And now this may be the avenue that you didn't know was actually the golden path to the top of the podium. I just see so many opportunities in this for you to reach maybe more people that have things end not the way they expected. So that was a very powerful statement for me when you said, your career ended differently. And I'd love for you to talk about that because not everyone knows swimming careers now. I think you could have gone on and made the 2016 Olympic team and possibly won gold there, but your career ended differently. And can you share with our listeners what happened?
Yeah. And thank you for saying all of that. I think that's what made having to end in this way that much more painful because I really was on that path. I made the comeback, as you mentioned, in 2013. And to start, the whole point of that comeback was to really enjoy the process. I, prior to that, had not been enjoying the process. I had lost my passion a little bit, which is what prompted taking the year off. And for the first time in a really long time, I was enjoying going to practice. I had an awesome partnership with my coach. My husband was training me on land. I felt so explosive and strong. And heading into the 2014 National Championships in Irvine, California, which is really the setup for everything leading into Olympic trials into Rio, because at that meet, for those listeners who don't know much about swimming, you qualify not only for the Pan Pacific Championships, but you qualify for the World Championships. So it really sets up your next 2 years swimming internationally for Team USA into the Olympics. And I'll never forget, I was pacing, as fast as I was pacing in 2008 in a pace set the Saturday before we flew out to Irvine. And I remember just feeling so ecstatic, so relieved that I was kind of finding my pace again, finding my joy. And I landed and I remember feeling this just weirdness in my chest, I guess is the best way to describe it. Like kind of when you have a cold coming on or some type of sickness, you're like, that's weird. That just was a little funny, and feeling a little bit more shortness of breath than normal. And as any athlete in that situation would do, I kind of brushed it off and thought, okay, well, it's fine, whatever. I don't have time to get sick right now. It's just a cold. Don't worry about it. And to fast forward a couple of days, that quickly moved into a sharp pain in my rib area. I swam the prelims of the 100 freestyles, kind of a tune-up for that meet, and ended up getting out of the pool, not swimming great. And it moved into just like someone had a samurai sword just stabbing me in my ribs. And unfortunately had to pull out of that meet. And at that point, I was getting all these different diagnoses. I think the initial one was an intercostal strain. And I remember thinking, a strain. How weak are you that you can't push through a strain? and at the time flew back 5 hours, which now knowing what it was, probably not the smartest idea, but flew back to Miami where I was living at the time, and now commenced probably the most confusing 6 weeks of my life, because I was going to different doctors. They were telling me that I had pneumonia, so they put me on a Z-Pack. They were telling me I had asthma. And here I am feeling crazy, weak, scared, because at one point the pain had gotten so intense in my rib area that I passed out onto thank goodness the bed was there. But finally demanded a blood test where my D-dimer, which is a indication of a blood clot, was elevated, got a CAT scan, and immediately was admitted to the hospital because I had 2 blood clots in my right lung.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So I think that at that point there was a combination of, I was definitely worried, but most of it was relief, because for 6 weeks I had felt like started to question myself, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I having this extreme pain, but no one can find out what's wrong with me? And I wasn't thinking about the fact that, and I found out later, 100,000 Americans die every year from a pulmonary embolism. It happens all the time. And I wasn't thinking about death. I was thinking, oh, so the blood thinners you're going to put me on now, is that going to affect my endurance? I'm still in the mindset of an athlete and wanting to swim fast and not thinking about my life. And to not go into too much detail, I kept trying to swim. I kept trying to make it work. And ultimately what I was told by a surgeon and a doctor was that the scar tissue that built up in my lungs during that period where the blood clots were in there gave enough that it was going to be really, really challenging to swim at my top level for trials, because obviously swimming lungs are a pretty important part of being successful. And I had to ultimately make the decision to retire, because the whole point of coming back was to enjoy the process. And I was miserable each and every day. I was crying, I couldn't breathe, and it just wasn't worth it to me to end my career at trials miserable, not being the best version of myself for my teammates, my family, my husband. And that's when I retired in the December of 2015.
Yes. And put that in a little bit of perspective for you coming back, how obviously we're going to talk more about this particular illness and also, what it means in general for people. But your 400 IM at your best was 4:31.1. Is that right? Yeah. So, yes. And to make the 2016 team, you would have only had to swim a 4:36.8. So it wasn't even that far out of your realm to make your third Olympic team 4 Olympics apart. So you could have been on track to make that team when these blood clots derailed you. So how common is this? I guess you've been doing work with this organization, or tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that was the silver lining and everything. I was able to work with Janssen and Xarelto, and I actually there was a commercial, which was crazy, and going to LA and filming this commercial was really fun. And the best part about it was I was able for a year to go around to different doctors' conventions, different speaking summits to raise awareness for pulmonary embolism, DVT, to really help doctors understand that it doesn't just happen to older people. There's so many younger people that have the condition. There's so many, I guess you could say, quote unquote, healthy people, looking people that experience this, because I felt like that was the biggest struggle for me when I was going through the diagnosis process, is the doctor would walk in and say, well, you look healthy. Being like, what does that mean? And it meant so much to be able to give back, raise awareness, feel like I was actually able to put power behind something traumatic that had happened to me. And I think that's also where I caught the public speaking bug a little bit too. I'd always done clinics and done speaking engagements through Speedo or different sponsors, but this was the first time that I'd really spoken in front of, I guess, a group and demographic that wasn't just swimmers. It was, highly respected doctors, and I felt such a charge and sense of pride to be able to speak in front of a group like that.
That's amazing. My husband's a physician, and I was talking about your diagnosis, mentioning it to him, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's especially after a long plane ride." What people, I guess can you give your 30-second warning for people? What to look for, what to avoid.
Yeah, I think, with mine, it wasn't even because long plane rides is definitely one. Birth control is definitely another, possible cause. And injury, a really intense traumatic injury. Those are some big indicators. Lower heart rate. So obviously as an athlete, my resting heart rate's 39.
Oh my.
Dehydration. So these are all things. You can have it run in your family. For me, they ruled out pretty much everything other than potentially the dehydration. I was living in Miami, so it's obviously hot, and the lower heart rate. But everything else, I tested for everything under the sun. And the biggest thing that happens is you feel something, a pain in your calf most of the time, sometimes in your leg. And I actually remember my mom saying, "Yeah, you called me and you said your legs were really sore, your calf was sore." And being an athlete, you're sore all the time. So I think that's the hardest thing to catch when you are just used to that feeling. And I had that about a week and a half before I set out to fly out to Irvine.
So the DVT means deep vein thrombosis. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So there's two different times. There's the DVT and then the pulmonary embolism. I had the pulmonary embolism. And so once you have that, it can travel. So it can, they travel from my calf to my lungs. And thank goodness for the fact that I'm still breathing today. It didn't travel, to my brain, because that's essentially deadly.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think if they had caught it in your calf, it would have made a difference?
Potentially, yes. I think the sooner that you can get on blood thinners and go see a doctor, the better. I just didn't. It's interesting because part of that campaign, I was able to go and talk with other athletes who experienced it. One of them was Brian Bickers, who was a NASCAR driver, and he had DVT, and he talked about just very similar reactions, just not thinking about it, not really realizing what it was. And I think that's the biggest issue is people don't go to their doctor right away.
Yeah. And like you say, when you're an athlete, you're always sore. So again, you're never going to thinking about things like that. I'd like to talk about something that really inspired me when I listened to your TED Talk. You talked about finding your deep down, or another gear,
Yeah.
which is, that just blew me away. Just this idea that you realized as a kid that you had something and you could call on it when you needed it. How have you used your deep down? You've also used words like intensity, strength, power. How have you used that, to get through all this and in your new career?
That's a great question. Yeah, the deep down came from, that's definitely in my book, because it was such a pivotal moment in my life and my career of just finding, wow, like I can kick a little harder, I can pull a little harder. Now it's more painful and it sucks, but it's getting me to where I need to be, so it's worth it. I think the message, it's funny, the message in my TED Talk that I don't feel like I got to at the end because I wasn't ready for it, was the fact that sometimes you have to use your deep down, which is kind of like your way of pushing through things, for something that you don't know why. When I finished my swimming career, I didn't know what my new need was, or my why, or my passion anymore. And it's taken me 5 years of just continuously needing to dig and try new things and be relentless in the face of not knowing what I was being deep down for. And I think that's the hardest thing. And that's the message I would want to give to people if I'd done my TED Talk over again is maybe you don't have a why. Maybe you don't have a need that's, allows you to go deep down, but that's all the more reason that you have to keep pressing forward to find that. And it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of resilience because it could take a really long time. For me, it took 5 years. So I think in order to get deep down, it's just having that push, that ability to get back up because it's out there and you have the belief and trust that it's out there.
I like when you talk about deep down, I think some people think, it's just all talent, and certainly in your case, much of it must be talent, but you talked about how it hurts. And I think that's a really interesting message, that it sucks, it hurts, but it's there. How can a normal person, how can we discover in our life that extra gear, that deep down? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's funny because from that talk is what really helped me develop that perspective and that message. So my new speech is called Embrace the Suck.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So it's a military slang, obviously, but it's really just embracing the fact that anything worth accomplishing that's big enough is going to be painful physically, mentally, emotionally in its process. And even sometimes when you know for a fact that you're ready to accomplish something, life could still throw a curveball, and that's painful and sucks too. And I think the underlying push for anyone is defining, like I mentioned, that need or want. And the piece of it that I've kind of developed over the past year is that even if say you're in a job that you just hate, which is, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, there has to be, okay, well, I'm in this job, but this job is going to lead to my ultimate dream job. And if it's not, then making a pivot in your life needs to happen, because you can really only embrace the pain, embrace the suck, if it's worth it in your mind, if it's big enough, if it scares you a little bit. But if you don't have that, it's going to be really, really difficult to find your deep down and your extra gear.
So finding your why, knowing your why, looking for your why, figuring, talking about your why is sort of the way. Is that what you're saying? Is the way to
that's the way to find your deep down.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think not everyone is fortunate enough. I was really fortunate enough early in my life to find that in swimming, but I actually had to go through it again when I didn't have swimming, and I had to start over, and I had to understand, okay, what's going to allow me to elicit that deep down again. And it took me until now really to feel like I was able to find it again.
So you might have to try out and embrace and toss a couple of whys before you get to another good why.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
That
and
is.
Katie, your experience with having your career end on a note that you could have probably never thought would end it, something kind of out of the blue and very sudden, highly relates to what we have going on right now with the pandemic and people's swimming careers. I especially think of the NCAA swimmers who were seniors who were,
I know,
didn't shave, they didn't shave and taper for their conference meets because they were going to go and maybe win their first NCAA title or something. And even people that were going to get married, in April that aren't getting married right now, or maybe, there was just that one shining softball game that the NCAA people were going to play or something. But this pandemic has ended things for people in a way they never could have imagined. And you obviously have this great experience with what you've just gone through. What advice would you give to people who've had things end?
Yeah, it's broken my heart to have to watch that on everywhere. I mean, even a high schooler graduating from high school, missing their prom. I mean, it's happening on every level. I think the only advice that I've felt very genuine and authentic to give is controlling what you can control. And I think from the swimmers that are going to continue on and look to 2021 to try out for the Olympic team, it's doing everything possible on land right now to stay strong, working on visualization, working on meditation, all the things that you can control without getting in a pool or without getting on a track or whatever facility you use in your sport. That's really all I could do. You know, when I had the blood clot, it was just, okay, keep forging on, keep controlling what I can control. Some days I may break down and cry, and I just need to let that happen, but just keep putting one foot in front of the other and continue to evaluate and analyze, okay, is this goal in front of me still what I want? Okay, if yes, then keep putting one foot in front of the other and finding things that make you feel empowered and make you feel in control of what's in front of you, even in a world where there are so many things that you could count that are out of your control.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
I love that.
And how much of your process in going through that was mourning?
A lot. I think that's my biggest message when I talk to people is I think sometimes we all want to be so positive and we want to say, okay, don't think about it. Just move on. Don't acknowledge. Just, you got to put on a happy face, fake it till you make it. But I actually feel differently. I think it's so important to have a meltdown, to cry, to acknowledge that it's awful and that it's terrible. Like, by keeping that bottled in and just pushing it under the rug, I think it makes it 10 times harder to put one foot in front of the other. And I actually always use this analogy, and it has to do with the 400 IM. There's this moment in the ready room in the 400 IM where you have a couple swimmers that are kind of trying to do that, right? They're like smiling, saying, okay, this is great, I'm excited to swim. And then you have what I would do and what some of my teammates and I would do, where just saying, wow, this is going to be so painful and this is going to suck. There's no way around it. Like, the 400 IM is just so painful. But the reason we do it is because, in my opinion, it's the race that I felt the most satisfaction, the most fulfillment, when I would break a record or go a best time. So it's worth it. But to sit there in the ready room and pretend that it's not going to absolutely be torturous while I do it takes more energy to pretend than just acknowledging it and then moving forward. And that's how I feel like I pretty much have tried to approach everything in my life thus far, is just acknowledging it. That doesn't mean you're being negative. It just means you're acknowledging some negativity and then letting it go and then moving forward.
I like that. You're being true to your thoughts and your real emotions and honest about them.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful.
When you said, in your TED Talk again, you said that you have a need to be extraordinary. Can you tell me what that means and how you're living that?
Yeah, I think extraordinary to me is my ultimate driver and need. And it's funny because when I first started swimming and when I ended in my career, I always thought, well, I have this need to be the best in the world as a swimmer, and that's my identity. And as I took a step back and gained some perspective, it was, no, I just want to feel like I'm doing something exceptional. I'm doing something that makes an impact on others in a positive way, or inspiring someone that I maybe don't even realize I'm inspiring. And that was the kind of key and the lock that opened up everything for me, because then I felt like I could see a lot more clearly. It's like, well, I don't have swimming, but swimming wasn't the reason. It was what swimming allowed me to do, which was make an impact. So I just have to now find something else that allows me to make an impact. And I think, being able to share my story and write a book and do corporate speaking and be able to frame my message in a way that relates to others has become my new way of feeling extraordinary.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Do you have a title for your book yet? Is it Embracing the Suck or what?
What's funny is it started out as, oh my gosh, that's what it should be called Embrace the Suck. But it's actually, it's a working title. I don't know if I want to put it out there yet, but Embracing the Suck is definitely a thread throughout the story. And Embrace the Suck is my title of my corporate speech that I give to groups of people.
Yeah, I love that. And you don't have to give us a title. I just didn't know if you had it yet. We've obviously you're a champion, and we like to ask, what do you think made you a success in swimming? But I think you've answered that with, that deep down gear and being relentless and wanting to be extraordinary. Unless you have something else you want to add to that.
I think that covers most of the bases. The only other one I would add is consistency. I think that all champions, anyone who's at the top of their sport, their career, in business, whatever it may be, consistency is always the common thread. They're not working hard and being super relentless one week and not the other. It's day in, day out, meticulous with details every single hour of the day. And I think that's really one of the top traits that I see in really successful, extraordinary people.
Yeah, and that was the question I was going to ask, because we've talked about your traits. So that is the traits that you think champions share. Is there anything else that you see across champions besides like consistency and relentlessness and the things we've talked about? Anything else?
I think on some level, there's the lack of, I think that you kind of have to not care what people think of you in terms of you. I guess it's a hard thing to say. Like, I always care if people think of me, but you can't care if people think you're, oh, this person's just working too hard, or why is that person staying late, or is that person a goody two-shoe? Like, there's so many things that you have to do as an elite athlete, where you have to be meticulous about the details, you have to go above and beyond, that sometimes can isolate you from people, and sometimes can make people maybe not understand you if you're not surrounded with others who think similarly to you. And I think that sometimes that can be really difficult. I know for me, when I was younger, it was sometimes isolating, because I would feel like I'd have a moment of like, oh, like, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? I feel like I was fortunate later in my life to be surrounded with a lot of elite athletes day in and day out, so it wasn't an issue. But I think sometimes when you stand alone and you aren't with people who get it, who get what that mentality looks like, it can be very easy to be swayed over to the other side of mediocrity and just kind of doing what the group does, when sometimes it takes someone to say, no, like, let's stay later, or no, I'm not going to back off on this one, or no, I'm going to go in on that extra day when maybe other people aren't. And that can be really hard sometimes.
Oh, I think that's gold. I mean, I think that is just nails it, because champions you do need to go against the grain a lot of times to be number one. So beautiful, beautiful.
Well, you're talking about excellence, and not everybody knows what excellence is or how to achieve it. But it sounds like as a young person, you had a desire for it deep down. And was there a coach that inspired you, or just was this sort of internal?
It's funny. I think it was always self-driven. I was always a very intense, obsessive little girl, I think. And I think I was actually fortunate, because sometimes I was pretty oblivious or ignorant to the fact that people would maybe be making fun of me of how intense I was about certain things. So I think I was just born like that, based on what my parents tell me throughout this whole book writing process. I've dug a little deeper into that and into my psyche when I was, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. But I do think that I've had coaches along the way that have, instead of stifling that, they've supported that and just let me run with it. And I think sometimes parents or coaches or, family members can stifle that. And I think it's just important to let that person just support that person and let them go for it.
Nice.
Nice. Well, our very last question that we like to ask all of our guests is there anything that we have not covered with you that you would like to share with our listeners?
I would say more of, my message of when I talk about swimming and I talk about athletics and what it does for you as a person. I think sometimes people put Olympians or we talk about champions up on this pedestal. And I have gone through all of the same feelings, emotions as anyone else out there. So as a teenage girl, I was having boy drama and boy problems. And I, was always worried about if my clothes looked right on me or if my pants, were too short because I had super long legs. I think that's a message that I love to share with people, because I think it's very easy to think that this person accomplished something in the pool. It makes them maybe different than anyone else, but they go through every single thing and emotion that anyone else does.
Cool. So you're just an average girl out there.
Yes, 100%.
Well, and also that's an encouragement to the average people out there that, and it goes with the theme of our show is being a champion in your own life. We may not have your talent or your opportunity, but we can do some of the things that you've done, knowing that you've had the same struggles that the rest of us have, and create and be excellent in our own lives.
Yeah, I truly believe that every single person can be extraordinary in their own right. I think everyone has a different definition of what that looks like, but that's the beauty of it. Every single person just has to define what that is. And I think a lot of times people don't take the time to sit down and say, hey, what does being extraordinary look like for you? What does it look like? And I don't know how many people could answer that, but once you can, it's an awesome feeling.
Yeah, that's a great question and message for everyone. So, Katie, if our listeners want to connect further with you, do you have a website or Instagram, or what's the best way for them to find you and see when your book comes out and anything else they want to know about you?
Yes. So my Instagram, and I'm very active on that, is just the letter K, the letter T, my last name, Hoff, the number 7, which, fun fact, that lane 7 was the first 400 IM Olympic team, 2004. That was the lane I was in. So I have 7 everywhere.
I love it.
And then my website is the same, www.kthoff.com.
Great.
Very good. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. Well, it has been so fabulous. Thank you very much for your time and inspiring us all in unique ways that, you just probably never dreamed you would, but you're a real inspiration to me, Katie, and I really appreciate you.
Me too, Katie.
Gosh.
You use words in different ways that really make my heart expand. So thank you very much, and look forward to reading your book.
Oh my
Definitely.
gosh. Thank you both so much. It's been great chatting with you guys, and hope you guys are staying healthy and safe during this time.
We are.
Yes,
Thank you.
You too. Thanks.
Takeaways, takeaways, takeaways. We've heard from you that your favorite section of our podcast is the takeaways. Thank you so much for that feedback. But before we get to the takeaways today, we wanted to ask you if you would please give us a 5-star review. That way, more people will be able to find our podcast. Also, if you could subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify, you'll never miss a podcast episode if you subscribe. And please share our podcast with your friends. And now, the takeaways.
So, Maria, what an awesome interview. I just loved Katie. How about you?
I did too. I thought, I like, I've talked about this before, but my goal for this year to be more reflective. And Katie has spent the last 5 years reflecting, and it's just a delight to talk to her and hear her wisdom. So yeah, I loved it.
Yes. What was your first takeaway?
Well, I was so inspired by, it's similar to other things we've heard, but the language around deep down, her finding her deep down, which, she discovered as a young person that she had a deep down, which was, as she put it, another gear that, that hurt and was hard, but that she could engage whenever she wanted to win or to push harder or to do well. I find just the calling it a deep down is wonderful. And I guess my takeaway is, where can I look for a deep down in myself around the different things that I do in my life? What's a deep down for me? So I love that. What about you, Kelly?
Yeah, and Maria, I knew you were going to relate to that the minute I heard it, because I think you are the type of person who knows how to find her deep down. Obviously, when you're out there riding your endurance bike races, you got to go deep down, and you have another gear like none of your competitors. But I think it would be interesting for you to look at that, or for any of us to look at that in other areas of our life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe just pick one area it's like that I'd like to improve in, and see if I can find a deep down.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's a really good one to think about it. It's going to take some reflection.
Yeah.
For sure. So my first takeaway, and I loved it right at the beginning, there's no mincing words. Katie knows that she's didn't win the gold. That was the one accolade within her swimming career that she didn't do. And I really loved her authenticity of saying, I'm never going to fully accept that I didn't win the gold. She's, she made 2 Olympics. She was the world record holder, and she still never won that gold. But I love just that she was so genuine to say, I'm never going to accept it. So the takeaway there is there are many things in life that we are going to want and that we're not going to get, but that if we look at the way she said she learned to appreciate the journey, which is, it sounds very overused and very trite, but it's really not, that what she got out of the journey was possibly equal to the reward of what a gold medal would have been. And, there are a lot of things that, I was a little kid like her going to sleep in my bathing suit, and I wanted to win a gold medal. I wanted to just go to the Olympics, but I never did. But you know what? I got so much out of my swimming career, even though I never achieved that goal. So I think she didn't achieve her gold medal. I didn't achieve going to the Olympics. Whatever, our listeners have out there, maybe they've wanted to get something that was just a little out of reach. And I think that's a big part of going for something big that you might miss, that the old saying, shoot for the moon and you'll land on the stars. So I think by just knowing that you're shooting for something that you really want, you may or may not end up with it, but you're going to get something out of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I really loved that authenticity too. The way I thought about it was, so many times we have deep disappointments in our life. There's expectations and there's loss. And sometimes you're not going to accept it. It's like, oh yeah, that happened. And that, for me, the loss of my sister, I don't know that I'll ever be able to accept it. But I can live with it and know that there are things that I've learned from that experience, and I'm a different person because of having gone through it. So I thought it was beautiful too. It isn't Pollyanna, when we don't get what we want, and especially if we've really worked hard for it, or if we lose something that we really wanted to keep, that's, there's no way to pretty that up. And I loved how she said, the journey is, that she missed it, but she's coming to appreciate what she learned.
Definitely.
Yeah. My second takeaway, which we've talked about many times on the show, but I guess I can't get enough of it, is, it's the finding your why. And I guess the slight different take on it is your why is going to be different at different times. And, you have to be willing to try something out. And if you can't get your deep down gear in that why, then you can move on to a different why. So I thought she was really interesting in her discussions around that, because she's had to, of course, change what she works for. And she's learned. And I think the time when she was talking to different doctor groups about the pulmonary embolus and DVT, that she had a nice why in there that got her the transition from leaving swimming to a new career. So I think that's the good takeaway there is your why right now might be different from your why in the future or your why in the past.
Yes, I love that. Beautiful. Yeah, and so my final takeaway was when we asked her, what traits do you think champions share? And she came up with one, which we hear some of them very repetitively because they are common among champions, but a kind of a newer one was the word meticulous, which, you and I have really resonated with both of us. And I think that, people that are meticulous sometimes are seen, it may not always be the most complimentary word, but that it is a part of success. Successful people are looking, I would definitely say Michael Phelps is meticulous about every part of his race, the turn, the streamlines, the underwaters, that is something that I think was a great takeaway to just maybe, if you're doing something in your life that you want to be a little more successful at, you could ask yourself, are you being meticulous enough with where you want to be, with where you want to go? So I really like that.
Oh, I did too. And I loved how you just put that, the way we can apply it to our lives. That's really helpful, because it's just another way of achieving excellence, is paying attention to the details and doing it right. And she was talking about it in the context of being maybe criticized for it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think when you're trying to pop your head in above average, people might try to pull you down a little bit. And so when you're behaving in a way that's meticulous, people might be like, why are you going to such extremes? But I love applying that word to something that maybe I'm not succeeding in right now, but I would like to see it succeed. Try to think about being meticulous. That's great. Thanks, Kelly.
And I loved that you told me that I'm meticulous with this podcast.
Yes, you are. That's why we're successful.
Yeah. So I think, but in some ways I thought, is that a compliment? But who cares? It
is. I think it is in terms of the word of excellence. Yes. Meticulous is what I think it is.
Awesome.
I think among champions, it's a great word.
Yes. Well, Maria, thank you so much for doing this with me. I really enjoyed that interview. It was just great to catch up with Katie Hoff after 5 years of retirement. So I got a lot out of it.
Me too. I loved it. Love being with you, Kelly.
You too. Love you, Maria.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This week's quote of the week comes to us from Katie Hoff. Anything big worth accomplishing is going to be painful, physically, mentally, emotionally, during the process.
You've been listening to the Champions Mojo podcast with host Kelly Palace and Maria Parker. Champions Mojo is produced by Cabra Media, and a new episode debuts every Tuesday. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. Follow Champions Mojo on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook @Champions Mojo.